Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to talk about the books I read for the CaribAthon. So June was Caribbean Heritage Month, and Karen over at Run Right Reads and PETA from Comfy Cozy Up had hosted a Caribbean-themed readathon called CaribAthon that ran for like 10 days towards the middle to the latter half of June. Of course, I didn't get my books read during that time period, so I just extended my CaribAthon reading into the month of July. I read from 3 different books, and I want to talk about each of them just to give a little wrap up for the books that I read. I did also fail in reading a book from each of the 13 independent nations in the Caribbean because all 3 of my books were from Jamaican authors, but I did at least get 3 books, or I read 2 books completely and read part of a third. So I feel fairly accomplished, and I do want to continue and read more books from the Caribbean region in future. So the first book that I read I want to talk about is the one that I didn't actually finish. And that was a book called Directed by Desire, the collected poems of June Jordan. June Jordan is she was a Caribbean based poet. Her heritage is Jamaican. And she was a professor, I think, at Berkeley for a long time. And she died in 2002 from breast cancer. But I read the first 200 pages of this collected works of June Jordan, which was over 960 pages long. So there was no way I was going to read the entire thing for the CaribAthon. And so these poems are basically, they deal with race and gender and immigration and representation. June Jordan has a very strong voice. But I will say that overall, I did not feel that she is a poet for me necessarily, because I am too, they just made me feel dumb. Her poems did. I did not understand what she was getting at for a lot of those poems. The ones that worked the best for me were a series of poems called the Roman Collection, which sort of were historical poems, or poems about the history of Rome. And there was some poems in there about parts in there about Pompeii, which I really found interesting. But overall, I really struggled with this collection of poems. The poems I read were basically spanned the time period between 1969 and 1971. And I could feel the emotion from the poems, but I didn't always understand what she was getting at. So not entirely successful, but definitely I think she would be an author for you to check out if you are into poetry more than I am. The first novel that I completed for CaribAthon was These Ghosts Are Family by Maisy. And I really enjoyed this book. It was a book that I listened to on audiobook. And I think it works really well in that format because the narrator had a accent that was able to deal with the patois. So that really worked. And so this is a story, basically, when the book opens, you realize the main narrator is a man called Abel Paisley. He's been living his life for the last couple of decades as Stanford Solomon. He has a family, he lives in New York, and he's about to tell his daughters that he has another family, that he had a family early on when he was a young man, had children in his first family, and that he's just about ready to meet his daughter from his first family that he's never met before. And so from that opening, we get Abel's backstory, and we get we get some backstory on the lives of his daughters and his wives. And so it's an intergenerational family saga, basically, but it's not told in a linear way. It bounces around from time period to time period, from character to character. Because I was listening to this on audiobook, it almost felt like interconnected short stories, because each chapter was basically a different character's story. And it could be historical, like back in the days of the ancestors of Abel that came from sugar plantations in the Caribbean, to present day New York City, to time periods when Abel was a young man who first immigrated to Britain, So it kind of bounced all over the place from character to character, but because it was done like chapter by chapter, I didn't get lost. I really enjoyed it. I liked the way that the story was told, with pieces of the puzzles kind of slotting in as you learn more and more of these characters' backstories. I will say there's magical realism in this book, which was fine and was sort of lightly dealt with until the end, when it sort of went off the rails with one particular storyline, which got kind of went from magical realism to really fantastic. But it was still an enjoyable story. It didn't put me off, and I really did enjoy listening to it in the audiobook form. I would definitely like to read more by Maisy Card. I think she is a very interesting author, and I liked how she told her story. And then the last book I read for the CaribAthon was a book called Patsy, which everybody seemed to have been reading for CaribAthon, and that is by Nicole, Dennis-Benn. Again, another Jamaican author. So this book, you know, it's been all over BookTube, so you probably know what it's about, but basically it follows the story of Patsy, a young mother from Jamaica who wants to go to America to basically connect back up with her oldest friend, Cicely. She finally gets a visa, and she does leave for America, leaving behind her young daughter, True, with her mother, who is a religious fanatic. And her mother promptly says, I can't raise this little girl, and True goes to live with her dad, who has another family. So the first part of the book, we're with Patsy, who has traveled to America and realized that a lot of what she's been told about immigrating from Jamaica to America has been basically a fantasy, and that it's not going to be easy nor very enjoyable to live life as an undocumented immigrant in New York City. Her fantasies about what her and Cicely might, how they might live together and, you know, basically continue on their friendship from when they were young girls, is also a fantasy. So the whole first part of the book, like I would say up to over halfway through the book, you're dealing with Patsy's disappointments, and you know, for a lot of the middle part of the book, it was kind of a slog. It really didn't go very much of anywhere. I didn't feel Patsy's character got developed. I mean, there was basically a 10-year time period where Patsy didn't develop at all as a character, and it just felt boring, to be honest. I enjoyed more the storyline with True back in Jamaica as she develops a relationship with her dad, dealing with her stepmother and her 3 brothers from her father's other family, and also questioning her identity, her gender identity, and her sexuality, and trying to discover who she wants to be as a person. I really enjoyed that storyline. The end of the book was stronger for me. I thought the ending was better than the beginning part of the story. And I liked the way that the book dealt with themes of motherhood and abandonment. And, you know, there's more than one way for a mother to abandon her child. You know, you can abandon your child, as Patsy did, physically by going to another country, or you can stay with your child and abandon them emotionally and leave them to deal with, you know, abuse or whatever their issues are, and not provide support and love that your children need. So I thought the exploration of motherhood and all the many ways how motherhood can go wrong for kids was pretty interesting. I also thought it was pretty interesting to watch True grow up in a society where she's, you know, gender non-conforming basically, and see how she is treated and how she deals with it. I thought she was a fascinating character. So it was a mixed bag for me. It wasn't a totally successful book, but it wasn't a disappointment, you know, it wasn't a thorough disappointment either. I would say it ended up being just about an average read for me. So those were the books I read for the CaribAthon. I think it was a really awesome opportunity to read books from an area of the world that I haven't read much from. So I'm hoping that we do it again next June when it's Caribbean Heritage Month again. And I hope that you all have found some good books to read lately, and I will talk to you later.